The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 13th chapter. We're starting at verse 24 and then bouncing around a little bit. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, but while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, Then do you want us to go out and gather them? But he said, No. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then Jesus left the crowds and went into a house, and his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. Jesus answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. The gospel of the Lord. Please have a seat. Have you ever wondered why they call it hay fever? I don't live around hay, but I think this weed is giving me weed fever, so you'll forgive the water every once in a while. All right, so here's something we all know about. Everyone who's ever played a sport involving a ball knows the cardinal rule of ball games. What is it?
Keep your eye on that ball.
Correct. Keep your eye on the ball. And why do we say that? Because that hand-eye coordination thing is real. It really is. So the pitcher wants to see, he wants to visualize where he wants that pitch to land in the catcher's mitt. Or, I don't know, I played football. I never was a receiver because I have hands of stone. But I can remember the coach, yelling at the receiver saying, you got to watch the ball all the way into your hands, because I topped out at high school ball, but I know that high school wide receivers like to start running downfield before they have the ball in their hands. So that you got to watch the ball into your hands, or you can't play the game well. Or if you are a golfer, how many golfers do we have out there? How many good golfers do we have out there? Yeah, I feel you. Well, I've heard that some people say you got to keep your eye on an individual dimple of that little bitty golf ball so you can bring the club head to it squarely. The faintest distraction between your eyeballs and the game ball, and the result will suffer. We will hit what we're looking at. So if you pull up to a curb without hitting it, don't look at it. If that's your aim, don't look at the curb. A lot of people always hit the curb. Why? Because they're looking at the curb so they can avoid it. But that hand-eye thing. So if you want to pull right up alongside the curb every time and save your tires and save your curb from those telltale, marks that you leave, you look at the line between the concrete gutter and whatever they have for the surface of the street, and you'll roll right up perfectly every single time. My dad taught me that, and it's still true. So, You might not have thought that you would get a parking, hack by coming to church, but no extra charge. So to get where you want to go, to achieve what you want to achieve, to hit what you want to hit, you got to focus on the right thing. And this is what Jesus is getting at in the parable of the weeds and the wheat. He's not talking about weeds and wheat, right? The parable essentially is keeping your eyes on the right thing. Now, a parable is simply information about God in story form. It's Jesus' favorite way of teaching because it is the people's easiest way of learning and understanding. Very few among Jesus' audience have any kind of education. So Jesus speaks using common images that everyone is familiar with to get across what he wants people to know about God and the life God wants us to live. So when you listen to the parables, you don't hear a lot of highfalutin theological talk. What you hear are stories about mustard seeds and lambs and vineyards and snow and, in this case, weeds and wheat. Now, all the theology is there. All the important stuff is in there. It's just talked about using language that's easily understood. I've already said the story isn't about weeds and wheat, but that's where I want to start because that's where Jesus starts. How many of you like weeds? Exactly. I think we already established that. Weeds evoke all kinds of feelings in us, and none of them are good. Weeds are obnoxious. They grow where we don't want them to grow, and they have nothing useful going for them. They don't yield fruit. They don't yield beautiful flowers, but they do yield thorns and briars, and those little stickery things that get caught in your socks and in your cat. And if you're lucky, like I was last week, in the bottom of your foot. So truly, weeds are a pain. And I think that's why we dislike them so much. That's probably why we've always not liked weeds, as far back as Jesus' day. He speaks of them as threats, as nuisances, and that's understandable because Jesus is speaking to an agrarian culture whose very survival depends upon good harvests. So weeds are malicious in addition to being obnoxious. Back then as well as now, weeds displace and disrupt the growth of crops. Their presence is as unwanted and unwelcome. So Jesus uses this image of weeds and wheat to alert us that in life as well as in wheat fields, what is wanted and unwelcome shows up a whole lot more than we'd like. Now, we've already established he's not really talking about weeds and wheat. He's talking about people. He's talking about people we'd rather not have around or be around. He's talking about people who, for whatever reason, are unwelcome, unwanted, and unproductive. Who are they? Well, they can be people who thrive on conflict. They like to stir things up wherever they go. They discourage faith in others, making fun of anybody silly enough to believe in a God you cannot see. They're often people who can't imagine how a person could be Christian and not also be judgmental or intolerant or bigoted. So if you say you're a Christian around them, you might get tarred with all the rest. Just like everybody else, they come in all shapes, all sizes, all dispositions. What to do with people like that? The master slaves in the parable have the reaction, I think, a lot of us would naturally have. Get rid of them, root them out, pull them up, throw them away. Eliminate the threat before the threat can gain a foothold. Have you ever, no show of hands, but have you ever known anybody you'd like to do this to? I think if we're honest with ourselves, people like this are all around. And they evoke from us not too nice feelings. They're in our neighborhoods, they're in our professional lives, they're in our churches, they're in our families. They could be impossible to get along with. They could be needlessly critical. They could take delight in tearing us down and tearing down the things we love and believe in. It would just be a lot nicer if they'd go away. And that's exactly the reaction the disciples have. That's exactly the reaction the slaves in the story have. Their approach is simple, and I will admit to you, deeply satisfying. Slash and burn. But Jesus says to leave them right where they are. Does that seem like an odd response to you? Why would Jesus allow people hostile to God to be around people faithful to God? Well, what he's doing there is he's setting up for us a reference point. He's giving us a boundary to focus on. And he's doing it for some really good reasons. Here's one reason. We don't have the whole story. The old adage, you can't tell a book by its cover, really applies here, I think. Back in the old days, the scourge of wheat fields in Palestine was a weed that had a very effective survival asset. It looked just like wheat until just before harvest time. So, for farmers to go plodding through their fields, trying to pull up all the bad stuff, would pull up a lot of the good stuff and trample a lot of the other good stuff in their wake. And the same is true with people. We don't have the whole story. We can't see forward. We can't look into the future. We will never know the whole story. So for us to make judgments as to who belongs and who doesn't will only result in a lot of mistakes being made and a lot of people getting hurt. If you're into music history, the name Dick Rowe might seem familiar to you. He's one of the most famous talent scouts in the modern music industry. He was the one who signed the Rolling Stones to their first recording contract. One day in 1962, he listened to an unpolished quartet that left him deeply unimpressed. In addition to rejecting the quartet's hope of getting a recording contract, he gave him a piece of advice. He said, learn to play different instruments. Guitars are on their way out. Less than 2 years after this fateful meeting, the band he rejected came to the United States, took the world by storm. They called themselves the Beatles. Oops. You know, it's easy to interpret things the wrong way. It's easy to see things that are not there and to overlook things that are. It's easy to draw false conclusions from what looks like solid evidence. And that's why Jesus tells us to keep our hands off. Only He really knows the difference between weeds and wheat. And that's how He wants us to live our lives, leaving the sorting out to Him. Here's another reason. There's a much better response to weeds than uprooting what we find objectionable. Jesus dealt with objectionable people all the time. He dealt with people whom other folks wouldn't deal with because they were undesirable or not worth bothering with in the understanding of first century Jewish culture. And yet He dealt with people, no matter what they were like, with kindness and mercy, especially those who found Him objectionable. And in no case did He cut any of them off at the knees and throw them away. What did He do with them? He loved them. He engaged them. He spent time with them. He converted them. And He left instructions to guide us in our dealings with objectionable people. He said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Now, is it just my imagination, or is our first human impulse something a little different than that? The disciples are great examples of how deep down inside of us we all have that impulse to fight fire with fire. It's easy to do what the slaves in the story wanted to do. It's easy to do what we see the disciples doing throughout Jesus' ministry with them. It's easy to want to go after the people we find objectionable and obnoxious and judged to be unproductive and let them know exactly what we think. But that's not what Jesus tells us to do. That's not how Jesus bids us to live. He's telling us to reject what is easy and to commit to what is hard. And what is hard is to resist the impulse to reject or cut off or dispose of people. What's hard is to meet them the way he did. Jesus also wants us to stay out of the worthiness business for the simple reason that we've got enough work in our own lives to deal with. Isn't that true? The 14th century German mystic Thomas à Kempis said, "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you want them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." I think those are wise words. Jesus put it a little differently. He said, "Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye and neglect the log in your own?" So what's the point? The point is Jesus is defining for us where we need to put our focus, where we need to put our energy, what we need to be looking at and thinking about. We're not to focus on who's good and who's bad, who's in, who's out, who's acceptable, who's objectionable. That is not our business. We're to focus instead, I think, on all the stuff that is unwanted, unwelcome, and unproductive in our own lives. Jesus is calling us to live lives that are committed to being good wheat. Jesus is calling us to use our time not to judge others, but to honestly appraise ourselves. See, you can't grow as a Christian if you're focused on where other people are not measuring up. Isn't that true? You can't improve at anything when all your attention is on how others need to improve. In the Psalms, King David prays a very authentic prayer. He says, "Lord, test me. Show me what is in me that is not pleasing to you, and help me to deal with it." I mean, that's a pretty bold prayer. I am sure I've never quite prayed a prayer that open and honest. Maybe I should start. But that's where the focus is. That's where the focus Jesus is talking about must be, on ourselves. I think the mistake the slaves make in the passage from Matthew is that they're focused on wrong things. They're focused on the obnoxious stuff in other people's lives when they need to be focused on the obnoxious stuff that may live in them. The good news is Jesus died for all of us. Everything that is wrong in us can be made right in God. And for that matter, everything that's wrong with the other guy can be made right in God. We're all made right in God. All of us. Which means we've all been absolved of the need to play watchdog. It is not our job to keep an eye on everyone else. That's too many moving targets. That's a sure way of losing focus and tumbling into lives of judgment and disappointment and eventually bitterness. If all you're doing is trying to identify what's wrong with the other guy, you'll be condemned to a life of disappointment. And if disappointment is not treated, it decays into bitterness. And that is a very, very bad way to spend the few years of life we have on this earth. Now, does that mean there's no faithful way to protect the church from toxic and destructive people? No. In fact, Jesus gives us an institutional model in Matthew 18 for dealing with people who'd rather see the church fail than prosper. But that's not what he's doing here. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking to us as individual Christians. And what is our job as individuals is to create places together where people can bring all the stuff that's unwelcome and unwanted and unproductive in their lives and have it all made right by the saving love of Jesus. The world needs places like that. Think about it. Wouldn't it be great if all the people who've been told all their lives that they're unwanted could find a place where they're welcomed and encouraged to grow and be productive, what a better world we would be. Don't you think? Here's the deal. The world does not have an antidote to its greatest failing. Only God does. The world cannot address sin. Only God can. Does anybody know why? Because it's only in God's power to forgive. He's given us the right to speak forgiveness for Him. He's given us the job to open doors to His house for Him. He's given us the privilege of speaking words of grace and welcome and healing for Him to a world that spends way too much time seeing what is wrong and what is hurtful and what gives us the feeling that there are some people that are not worthy of our love and attention. That is a lie. I thank God that where I have been able to spend most of the ministry I've got in me has been at a place like Trinity. Because for whatever reason, God has decided we are worth holding His love in such a way that people find it, and in finding it, find themselves. As we wrap our arms around anybody who comes through our doors and walk with them just a little deeper into the life of God. I believe that. And I think when the church is working right, and I'm not saying we're perfect, but when the church is working right, that's what happens. Look at Josh. 9 years ago, he came to us from the Bridge. Now, I'm not bad-mouthing other churches. I'm just saying what I've heard. You know, the Bridge didn't think he was up for the job. They judged incorrectly. Because in our embrace, Josh not only discovered the gospel, but heard the call of God to make that his vocation, to share with others the gospel he discovered among us. I'm not going to talk about Katie because she's sitting right in front of me. Okay, I'll do it a little bit. You know, Katie, God bless her. I remember the moment you decided to become a pastor. I remember it. We were here doing a baptism, I think, right? Was it a baptism? Yeah, I do remember it. We were done with the baptism, and I heard her say something like, "All right, God, I'm not going to fight with you anymore." Because the grace of that moment found a home in Katie's heart. I wish the whole world could experience what Josh and Katie have among us. I wish the whole world, if you have ever had an experience of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of healing, of comfort, of anything that we can only get from God here, gosh darn, I'd love to put that on our marquee and flash it for all the world to see. I don't even know if they'd understand it, right? But we know it lives here. And I think we've got to the place where we are not afraid to invite people here, hoping that something good is going to happen to them. I think we know that. Because we're so good? No. No. There's nothing about the greatness of Trinity that depends on our goodness. It all depends on God's greatness. And as we yield to God's greatness, we can truly show the world what the love of God really means, what the love of God can really do. The power of God's good news. Let all who have ears to hear listen.